Hi, in topic 10, we're looking at eating disorders. Okay, you can do some further reading in chapter 14 of Nutrition for Dummies, and also there's an article that discusses eating disorders, particularly anorexia nervosa and bulimia. So what you'll need to be able to do is to explain what an eating disorder is, be able to list the symptoms and treatments for anorexia nervosa, and the same for bulimia, and also describe symptoms and treatment for binge eating and the female athlete triad. And you should also have an understanding of the general steps required when treating people with eating disorders. Okay, you can get some background information on eating disorders by visiting the website, the National Eating Disorders Collaboration, and also by viewing these YouTube videos on eating disorders. Okay, a person is said to have an eating disorder when they become preoccupied with eating, with exercise, or their body shape. Eating disorders are often linked to psychological problems, often linked to people with got low self-esteem. And these are quite serious psychological problems, and in some cases can actually lead to death. Okay, here's some links to celebrities with eating disorders. So this is just to illustrate how common eating disorders actually are. Okay, here are some key facts about eating disorders in Australia. So firstly, that relationship between the eating disorder and some sort of psychological issue. You can see here it's relatively common, estimating something like 9% of the Australian population is suffering some sort of eating disorder. Affects a range of people, very young, as young as 7, right up to the elderly, age 70. Females are more likely to suffer eating disorders than males, but it is very dangerous. You can see here that a person suffering anorexia nervosa is up to 12 times more likely to die than a person in the general population. Serious issue, estimating costing Australia something in the order of $70 billion. Okay, here we've got some key points about eating disorders in Australia. So firstly, it's affecting millions of people. Anorexia nervosa is particularly dangerous. We see there's a death rate of around 20%. In Australia, it's costing Australian government something in the order of $70 billion. It does affect more males than females, a ratio of 6 to 1. Most cases happening during those teenage years. There's certainly a link with psychological problems, and it's important to diagnose the eating disorder so we can actually go about treating that problem. Okay, when we looked at food choices, we saw that people eat food not just for its nutrients, but for many other reasons as well. In particular, things like emotional needs, comfort, as a sense of reward, and sometimes this type of eating, this emotional eating, comfort eating, can lead to eating disorders of some types. All right, so the experts believe that many factors could lead to an eating disorder. Could be the family environment, could be cultural, could be viewing unrealistic images, the person's personality traits, and there's also a genetic link. Okay, in terms of the family environment, some people believe that there's a link between having a very rigid family structure potentially may lead to problems with anorexia. And it's also believed by some that if you've got an unstable family organisation, it might actually lead to problems such as bulimia. Okay, it's believed that cultural values may also lead to eating disorders. For example, in Western cultures that value slenderness, they found that 28% of young males were dissatisfied with their body image, and 35% of females were also dissatisfied with their body image. It's believed by some that the unrealistic media images portrayed may lead to some adolescents developing negative body images, and then that leading to an eating disorder. Here's an example where media images have resulted in an eating disorder. So what happened here was in Fiji, just after they were exposed to Western television, young females in Fiji then started vomiting to start to control their weight. So they started to develop a form of anorexia bulimia. So they found that something like 74% of young girls in Fiji were then feeling that they were too big and too fat. Okay, some people believe that certain personality traits are associated with eating disorders. So, for example, with anorexia, it's believed it's associated with people that are perfectionists, are inhibited and show emotional control, whereas bulimia is associated with people that are more impulsive, have got low self-esteem, more erratic, more attention-seeking. There seems to be a genetic link to eating disorders. You can see here a person is 7 times more likely to develop an eating disorder if they've got a relative that's had a previous eating disorder. And in terms of biological factors, it's believed that chemical imbalances and problems with the central nervous system may also play a role. Okay, health professionals have developed an eating disorders test. It's called this Eating Attitudes Test 26. It's 26 questions. If you could please go online to the website listed below and please complete your own self-assessment. So using this test, any score above 20 may indicate that the person may have an eating disorder. It doesn't prove you've got an eating disorder, it suggests you might have an eating disorder, and if you're worried about it, you should then seek some further advice from medical professionals. Okay, we'll have a look at the first eating disorder here, anorexia nervosa. Medical disorder in which the person is not able to maintain their correct weight, so their weight is less than 85% of their expected weight. Up to 95% are young females. Estimated that up to 1% of females may develop this condition, and once a person's got anorexia nervosa, up to 20% of those people could actually die. So here's a list of the key symptoms of anorexia nervosa. So for body mass index of less than 17.5 or less than 85% of their expected weight, very restrictive eating, they basically starve themselves, they're very fearful of gaining weight, they don't have any menstrual cycles for at least 3 months, very unhealthy image of their body, and often they deny that they've actually got a problem. Here are some of the risks associated with anorexia nervosa, basically the same risks as people that are starving, imbalances in electrolytes, heart problems, gastrointestinal problems, osteoporosis, you're losing protein, so you're losing muscle mass, and you're also losing your skin, hair, and nails. Here are some general observations people have made about people that are suffering anorexia nervosa. Tend to be white females, tend to be upper class, tend to be a very responsible, very strict upbringing, very competitive people, often have some conflicts within the family. Family often has high expectations, and it's basically their only way that they can show some sort of control. The person feels they can't control anything else, but they can control how much food that they actually eat. So this table here summarizes some of the behaviors of people with anorexia nervosa and some of the symptoms, both mental symptoms and physical symptoms. In this video, people who have suffered eating disorders such as anorexia nervosa are interviewed. Okay, next eating disorder we're looking at is bulimia nervosa. This involves a cycle of binge eating followed by purging. So during binge eating, the person eats a large amount of food in a very short period of time, and then the person feels guilty and then tries to remove that excess food from the body by either vomiting or using other means such as laxatives. Okay, bulimia nervosa believed to affect up to 4% of women, much more common in females than males, ratio up to 1 in 10. Approximately 1% of patients may actually die from complications of bulimia nervosa, and sometimes they're suffering both bulimia nervosa and also anorexia nervosa at the same time. Okay, this diagram here is showing the binge purge cycle of bulimia nervosa. So the person over here starts off feeling guilty or very anxious, and that will trigger off a bout of binge eating. So the person will eat lots of high energy food, lots of chocolates or sweets, and then they're worried about gaining weight. So what they'll do is then start to remove that excess food from the body by purging, by vomiting, and that then relieves that fear of gaining weight. Okay, so here's a typical profile of somebody who might become bulimic. So it tends to affect young adults, particularly young females at university. The person tends to already be maybe slightly overweight, may have already undergone a number of failed diets as a teenager, and these individuals tend to show impulsive behavior. Okay, typical symptoms are the binge eating and the purging. And this cycle on average happens something like twice a week for up to 3 months. And individuals tend to binge on very energy dense foods, very high calories. Here are some signs that a person might be suffering bulimia nervosa. Well, a large amount of food will disappear from the house. Person tends to go to bathroom, particularly after meals. There might actually be some signs on their back of the knuckles or even calluses indicating that the person has, tried to induce vomiting. And lastly, they tend to withdraw from others. Some risks with that constant purging might actually lead to electrolyte imbalance, might lead to problems with the gastrointestinal tract, particularly the esophagus might actually be burnt by the stomach acid coming up. And the stomach acid might also be causing some dental problems, so you might get some tooth decay as a result of that excess acid. And as has been mentioned, there might be some calluses on the back of the knuckles, where the person is constantly trying to force themselves to vomit. So this table summarizes the typical behavior of someone suffering from bulimia nervosa, and also some of the symptoms, both the emotional symptoms, mental symptoms, and physical symptoms of that condition. Okay, this next table just summarizes some key points regarding those two eating disorders. So here we've got the anorexic nervosa key points and the bulimia nervosa. Okay, binge eating disorder involves eating a very large amount of food in a very short period of time and generally involves some sort of emotional eating. The person may eat in secret, and it's been estimated that up to 2% of the population might be suffering from binge eating. All right, so some of the main characteristics of the binge eater is they tend to isolate themselves, eating large amounts of food, might be suffering from stress, depression, anxiety, and uses food for comfort eating. And again, they tend to eat food that's very high in calories, junk food and other high energy food. They're eating not for nutritional content, but more for that emotional need. Okay, some of the symptoms, person tends to be overweight or obese. They tend to have a complete lack of control when they're binge eating, quite chaotic. They're eating at a very fast rate, isolated, have very low self-esteem, and the person might be suffering some other psychological problems such as depression or anxiety. Okay, some of the health risks, they're eating lots of high energy food. So the person is likely to be overweight or obese, and that might then lead to chronic problems, whether it's diabetes or heart disease. And these people are often suffering anxiety or stress, and that may then lead to other psychological problems. Please view this video, which interviews a typical binge eating disorder sufferer. Right, the last eating disorder we'll be looking at is the female athlete triad. So the triad consists of these three. So female athletes that need to maintain a lean body, such as females that are in the sports of gymnastics, swimming, marathon running. These are the groups that tend to suffer the female athlete triad. Okay, the athlete is deemed to be suffering from female athlete triad if they have a disordered eating. They also have a lack of menstrual periods for 3 months, and they're also suffering from osteoporosis. All right, so most of these key points have already been covered. So it's affecting mainly female athletes that need to maintain a lean body. In particular, we can see here the gymnasts accounting for 62% of all sufferers of female athlete triad. And remember the triad consisting of these three parts. Okay, treatment involves getting the athlete back to a normal, healthy weight, so reducing that preoccupation with food. So we tend to slowly increase the amount of meals, decrease the amount of exercise, and then hopefully re-establish normal menstrual cycles. When treating a person with an eating disorder, you need to take a team approach. You need to have people with a medical background, nutritional background, and also psychological background. Okay, we're going to need a nutritional plan, maybe a psychological plan, and you might also need to have some sort of medications as well. So, for example, treating a person suffering from anorexia nervosa may involve having a nutritional expert to make sure the person retains a correct weight, shows correct eating behaviours. You might also need medical experts to treat any medical complications that have developed from this eating disorder. Also might need medication to treat any psychological problems. You might need psychological help to deal psychological problems, and also the assistance of family and friends will also help deal with these psychological problems. Okay, if the eating disorder is classified as low risk, low risk, the person's not suicidal, they're in reasonable health, they're quite stable, then they might be simply treated as an outpatient. If they're at moderate risk, they might be classified as level 3, level 4, which may involve some hospitalisation. And then at level 5, the eating disorder is classified as very high risk, so the person is quite unstable, their condition is quite poor, they need to be constantly supervised, and the person is actually at risk of suicide. Right, the last thing we're looking at is some suggestions of how we can prevent some of these eating disorders from actually happening. So they're suggesting that we reduce weight-related criticism of individuals, identify these unrealistic body images that are concerning the children, young adults, ensure that they participate in physical activity, establish a modelling of correct healthy diet by the parents, and making sure you've got correct eating habits at home, school, and the social environment. Thanks, everyone.